So we have Mr. S.N. Sahu with us now, and he will be joining us for today's session. The topic of discussion today is dialogue, public reasoning, and deepening of democracy. Mr. S.N. Sahu has served Mr. K.R. Narayanan, the late President of India, as officer on special duty and press secretary, and had a tenure as director in the Prime Minister's office and joint secretary in Rajya Sabha Secretariat. He is a student of collective works of Mahatma Gandhi and writings of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Swami Vivekananda. He will be sharing with us his experiences on dialogue and democracy today. Welcome, Mr. Sahu. You have a total of 2 hours, including the question answer sessions, which will follow your talk. And over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to get this opportunity created by India Law Foundation. And today we are going to discuss, dialogue, public reasoning and deepening of democracy. I think this topic has been shared with all of you. In the present day context, importance of dialogue is extremely, sensitive. I mean, the importance of dialogue has been sensitively underlined, not only in our country, but across the world. With the upsurge of the right-wing forces in many parts of the world, including India, this emphasis on dialogue is getting diminished. Dialogue, discourse, engagement, and consultation process that is being diminished. So, for instance, let me refer to the decision of the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, to repeal the farm laws which were enacted by Parliament in 2020, and there was a year-long farmers' movement in India. The unparalleled and nonviolent and peaceful protest movement against 3 farm laws. Why did the farmers launch that movement after the 3 farm laws were passed by the Parliament? Because the farmers were not engaged in dialogue. They were never consulted. There's no discussion with the farmers. Okay, so law-making process is based on dialogue, deliberation, and consultation. So when the law which has been framed by the government is not anchored in dialogue, deliberation, and consultation, that law faces resistance from people, because law as an instrument is aimed at furthering people's interests or the interests of the political regime, or to bring about social change. And of course, there are many other objectives which are normally achieved by the instrumentality of law. So in a modern democracy, the instrumentality of law is normally framed by the government. It is also framed by an MP, an ordinary MP who is not a minister. He is called a private member. Or in a legislative assembly, a MLA who is not a minister is called a private member. Now, even private members can pilot a bill, to frame a law or to take it forward so that it is enacted as law by the legislature. So when the government brings a bill, that primarily, or a private members brings a bill, those primarily reflect the intent of the government. Okay, so the farm laws which were moved in parliament, they were framed by the government. So the government bills, farm laws or farm bills, they reflected the government intent. So what government wanted to do for the farming community, for the agricultural sector, and so on and so forth. But government intent is not final. Government intent has to be moderated, has to be mainstreamed, has to be fine-tuned by legislative intent. And what is legislative intent? The intent which is generated inside the legislature through dialogue, discussion, debate, and scrutiny of the government intent. So when these farm laws were framed by the government displaying government intent, they were introduced in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, the apex legislature of our country. But the government intent was pushed through. It was never subjected to dialogue, debate, or discussion. It was only subjected to voting in the parliament. In Lok Sabha, it was passed because the ruling dispensation, that is BJP, it has a huge majority. Okay, so it was just discussed for a few minutes and it was passed because they have the majority. And when it came to Rajya Sabha, because in Rajya Sabha, the ruling dispensation, that is BJP, didn't have the majority in the House, so they cobbled up the majority. But when it was being subjected to voting, many members of the opposition, they demanded that it should be sent to the select committee of the House. Because in the select committee, there would be members cutting across party lines and they would examine every provision of the bill by inviting the experts, farmers' bodies, and many other people who have the domain knowledge on agriculture. So that would involve discussion, dialogue. That would involve, engagement with people, who are not part of the legislature as members of parliament. But that was never done. The demand to refer those bills to the select committee house was rejected. Rejected by voice vote. And finally, when the bill was taken up in Rajya Sabha for eventual approval through voting, the deputy chairman declared that the bills were passed by voice vote. He sought a voice vote and then after that he declared that the bills were passed by voice vote. In other words, by declaring the bills passed through voice vote, actual voting demanded by some opposition members was not considered too. And in the Constitution, there is a provision in Article 100 that every issue would be decided on the floor of the House by members present and voting. This means it entails physical voting. That physical voting, which was enshrined in the Constitution, was not allowed to take place. It is also enshrined in the rules of procedure and conduct of business of the parliament. Even that was disregarded. In other words, the bills were passed, got adopted and enacted, even because of the assent given by the President of India to those bills, and they became acts. And then farmers' bodies across India, they were astounded that, the stakeholders who are going to be affected by those bills, they were never consulted. So therefore, the agitation started. So the sum and substance of what I'm trying to drive home is that, the law which is not based on deliberation, consultation, dialogue, and scrutiny, that law becomes a manifestation of the government intent, not the legislative intent. Okay, the Chief Justice of India, on Independence Day, he made a very interesting point. He said, when the court examines the bills which are being, challenged, or court when it examines laws which are challenged in the Supreme Court, now they find it difficult to understand the legislative intent. Because the laws are passed in parliament and legislatures without much discussion. In other words, the laws are being framed without dialogue, without discussion, without scrutiny. So only through dialogue, scrutiny, discussion, the legislative intent is expressed over the government intent. So government intent combined with legislative intent eventually leads to fine-tuning of the law. So in the absence of this legislative intent, in other words, absence of legislative intent means absence of dialogue, absence of discussion, absence of interrogation, absence of application of mind, which would reflect diverse viewpoints. So therefore, the Chief Justice said, when we examine a law, we do not these days find the legislative intent. In other words, we do not find that a bill has been enacted as law through proper discussion, through proper, scrutiny of the provisions of those bills. So that leads to weakening of democracy. When there is no dialogue, no discussion, no scrutiny, no examination of the government intent, then that would lead to imposition of the government will. And therefore, when government will is imposed, this means deliberation and consultation process has been dispensed with. In other words, dialogue has been dispensed with. So therefore, there is no adequate public reasoning. Public reasoning means some measure, some legislation, some policy which is framed by the government, and then it is subjected to dialogue, scrutiny, examination, and thorough discussion. On the basis of that, the decisions of the government gets legitimacy through public reasoning. Okay, so therefore, there should be some reasoning behind a decision. Every decision, every public policy, which is being framed should have some reasoning, some rationale, some basis. And that public reasoning, when it comes to public policy, has to be based on dialogue, discussion, embracing the other, appreciating the critical comments, not dismissing, or, the farmers' movement. It was described as a work of the Khalistanis. It was described as, as something which is being driven by, it was said by Prime Minister in the Parliament. It is based on FDI. Farmers' movement is based on FDI, and he expanded FDI issues to say that it is foreign destructive ideology. In other words, an attempt was made to defame the people's movement, without understanding the public reasoning, which was the driving force of the movement. And the public reasoning was that those bills were imposed on the farmers because they were not consulted. There's no dialogue between the farmers and the government before the bills were framed. Even the Supreme Court, when it was examining the constitutional validity of those laws, made it very categorical that no consultation took place. In other words, no dialogue took place. So therefore, the year-long movement, a remarkable, peaceful, non-violent movement. And eventually, the government came to the senses. And the Prime Minister, who is the head of the union government, decided, to repeal the bills. That was the demand of the farmers. So eventually, people's will prevailed. And why did it prevail? Because there was no dialogue, no discussion. There could be any number of reasons behind the decision of the Prime Minister to withdraw those bills. The farmers' movement, or any movement in a democracy, has an impact on people's, right to vote, how people would choose their representatives by exercising their right to franchise. So this movement had an impact on the manner in which they would cast their votes. Maybe that because of that factor, the government was jittery, the government was nervous, and therefore took a decision to withdraw. In other words, the movements launched by people, as long as they are non-violent and peaceful, such kind of movements are launched by people by exercising their constitutionally guaranteed fundamental right to protest, Article 19. The Constitution, which is the fundamental law of the land, provides that fundamental right to protest. Many people objected to that protest, many maligned it, many tried to defame it, many used many other terms to ridicule it. Okay? But then that constitutionally guaranteed right to protest eventually generated some dialogue. The government invited the farm leaders. There had many, occasions when they sat on the table and discussed. So, just imagine, when the government intent was expressed in the bill, that time the government never indulged or engaged in dialogue with the farmers. But when the farmers protested, the government invited them for dialogue. So the movement in a democracy, which is anchored in the constitutionally guaranteed right to protest, that eventually forced the government to engage in dialogue. So therefore, public reasoning behind the movement became a factor for dialogue. The farmers never threw stones. The farmers never killed anybody. Rather, 750 of them, lost their lives during the year-long movement. So that remarkable non-violent protest movement resulted in dialogue. So therefore, this actually has been commented by many experts that Indian democracy, which of late has been stifled because of majoritarian tendencies, which has been stifled because of the absence of dialogue, because of the absence of scrutiny, has really showed a path. I mean, the farmers' movement showed a path for dialogue. The laws or the bills which were framed and were enacted and imposed on people were not acceptable to them. So therefore they came to the streets. They talked about consultation, they talked about dialogue, and through that dialogue, they actually deepened the cause of democracy. And eventually, a government with a huge mandate caved in. And they, the head of the government decided that the laws would be repealed. Because, as Prime Minister said, he could not convince a section of the farmers. That was an ostensible posture taken by the Prime Minister, that he could not convince. This means there was lack of dialogue to convey or to convince the stakeholders that the bills are beneficial for them. So the dialogue could be, or the path for dialogue could be paved, through a protest movement. So protest movement generated the conditions for dialogue. So therefore, in a democracy, when you do not, when the political regimes and the leadership do not initially engage in dialogue, debate, discussion, then that would lead to, agitation, movements, protests. And these agitations, movements, and protests in any democracy, they are positive signs. They are not negative signs, provided these movements, agitation, and protests are peaceful, are in tune with the constitutionally guaranteed right to protest with reasonable restrictions, and so on and so forth. So therefore, how, this movement of the farmers affirmed the idea of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. What did he say? B.R. Ambedkar said, educate, agitate, and organize. These three words: educate, agitate, and organize. So first, one has to educate people about the issues. And then they have to be convinced that through education, if they are made to understand about the issues, then they can be mobilized for agitation. Agitation would lead to organization. Okay, so this educate, agitate, and organization. This is a great slogan of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And he said, and now this great slogan of B.R. Ambedkar is interpreted by Professor Amartya Sen. I had suggested in the reading list, John Dredge and Professor Amartya Sen, in their book, India, the Uncertain Glory, in the first 30 pages, he refers to this slogan of Ambedkar: educate, agitate, and organize. So how do you promote education except through dialogue, discussion, engagement, transmission of ideas? Only after you engage with people through dialogue, discussion, and educational methods, then only one can, agitate. And again, this agitation must be based on constitutionally provided, lines. And therefore, then it will lead to organization. So Amartya Sen and John Dredge, they said this slogan of Ambedkar, educate, agitate and organize, is a pillar of public reasoning. So when be the students, be the people, be the any other category of citizens, when they are disaffected by the decisions of the government, when they are not convinced by what the government is doing for them, or for any entity, forget about government, any entity, be it, let's say, the cricket board or be it any other organization, they have the right to analyze it and if necessary will protest. So this kind of decisions based on dialogue, mutual engagement and consultation, and then agitation and organization combined together provides us the public reasoning. And this public reasoning based on education, agitation and organization, actually it depends democracy. It prevents violent, bloody revolutions to take place. And these acts as safety valves in a society. I mean, when in a pressure cooker, when you use the pressure cooker by putting it on the oven and giving it and igniting it through the flames, pressure cooker boils within, whatever is there that boils. And when the pressure is built up, pressure of the gas is built up, and then when it is built up to a certain extent, then the extra pressure has to go through the safety valve, otherwise pressure cooker would burst. So this dialogue, debate, discussion, engagement, they act as safety valves in a society. They constitute the channels through which grievances are ventilated. People's anger is released. This actually brings down the tension in society. This brings down the pressure and anxiety of the people. So therefore, dialogue as a method, it is important not only to fine-tune the ideas, fine-tune the knowledge, and to take it to higher levels of understanding, higher levels of consciousness. It also acts as a safety valve to bring down pressure, anxiety, and to restore sanity and strength to our collective existence. So therefore, dialogue is so critical. Just imagine, had there been, had those farm bills been discussed with the farmers before they were enacted, such a year-long agitation would not have taken place. 750 lives would not have been lost. The farmers' anxiety, their frustrations would have been contained to a great extent. But even now, through peaceful demonstrations, peaceful protest, they were, they remained non-violent, and it eventually forced the government to take a decision to repeal it. Okay, so therefore, this kind of, the protest movement itself became a theater for dialogue. People invoked the pictures of Gandhi, Ambedkar, Bhagat Singh. Some of you who had gone to Singhu border to see the protesting farmers must have realized how they were invoking Ambedkar, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh, and Sikh gurus. Okay, so from diverse streams, the ideas were put together. That led to a collective dialogue through a protest movement. So Indian democracy, which thrives on dialogue, discussion, argument, and that's why Professor Amartya Sen said, argumentative India. So he described Indians as argumentative. So why did he say that? Because this argumentative Indian comes forward, to question, to apply logic, to argue with anybody, be they the authorities, be they somebody in the street, or some people in the street. So these are the foundational pillars of our democracy. Okay, so therefore, these kind of approaches based on argument, based on dissent, based on, differences, these would constitute the foundational pillars of public reason. So without that, democracy would collapse. There would be uniformity, not variety. And uniformity is an antithesis of dialogue. Because dialogue essentially means diversity of views, of opinions, of perspectives, of persuasions. So therefore, it is in this context, in the present day context of the world, dialogue is extremely important when there is some kind of attempts made to, make everything uniform. If some people say that India is one nation, one culture, one religion, one language, this is the antithesis of India. India means diversity of languages. India means diversity of faiths. India means diversity of cultures. There's no one culture. So, in the Kisan Mahapanchayat organized in Muzaffarnagar in Uttar Pradesh, it was rather refreshing and empowering to, listen to the chants, Har Har Mahadev, Allahu Akbar, together. A Hindu, Tikayat said Allahu Akbar, others said Har Har Mahadev, Sikh said Vaheguru, and Medha Patkar said Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, Hum Sab Hai Behen Bhai. You see, these diversities were put together in such a manner which challenged the majoritarian tendencies, which is trampling upon the traditions of dialogue and debate and dissent. So these movements, they are creating opportunities for dialogue, creating opportunities to celebrate diversities. The anti-CAA protest, which was organized in Sahin Bagh, the Sikhs went and opened langars. Many others went and contributed something or other. So that protest movement became all-inclusive. And it was a movement to celebrate the idea of Indian citizenship, which is deeply secular. So therefore, secularism means celebration of diversities. And celebration of diversities means dialogue among different faiths, different linguistic traditions, among different castes, and so on and so forth. So therefore, by celebrating the idea of secularism, we are celebrating the culture of dialogue. Because when there are so many faiths in this country, or further in the world, or further in all countries of the world, unless we have the tradition of dialogue or engagement, there would be bloodshed and violence. In Europe, there used to be, years of bloodshed and war in the name of religion. In the name of Christianity, so many people are killed. There have been history in this world. I mean, history of bloodshed, history of religious persecution. Why did that take place? Because there was no scope for dialogue. There was only one intent which was imposed. And that intent, when challenged, led to persecution. So where there is a scope for dialogue, debate, discussion, persecution, bloodshed, war, violence, that get diminished or to a great extent contained. And people find now war is unacceptable. Bloodshed is unacceptable. And therefore, Mahatma Gandhi, when he talked about nonviolence, he employed nonviolence as a method of struggle. But for him, nonviolence had many dimensions. And one of the dimensions was, to dissent. Nonviolence as a method of dissent. The Britishers imposed a particular intent, a particular narrative, saying that British rule was there in India to civilize the country. That was one particular narrative they gave. But that narrative was challenged by exploring the intellectual traditions, which highlighted the un-British rule manifested in economic drain and economic exploitation of India. So people are mobilized based on that dialogic engagement that the British rule caused massive economic ruin. Okay, so the non-violent approach essentially means an approach based on dialogue and discussion. As much as Ambedkar's vision based on education, agitation, and organization. So Gandhi said, there are several dimensions of nonviolence. One dimension is that one should sharpen the mind so as to debate with somebody, remain engaged in dialogue with somebody, discuss with somebody. And unless one sharpens one's own mind, how does one remain engaged in debate, discussion, and dialogue? So therefore, sharpening of mind was understood by Gandhi as a one form of nonviolence. So this dimension of nonviolence, emphasizing on sharpening of mind is nothing but giving scope to dialogue, debate, and engagement. So that is why the freedom struggle of India, anchored on nonviolence and under the leadership of Gandhi, was a remarkable movement for dialogue. See, for instance, when you got independence, the leadership of India decided to have Mountbatten as the viceroy. So unless that tradition of accommodation, that robust tradition of accommodation was invoked to have Mountbatten as the viceroy for some time. Ambedkar was so much opposed to Indian National Congress, was chosen to be the chairman of the drafting committee. So how, unless, this tradition of dialogue and accommodation, unless that was not there in a robust form, possibly that could not have happened. So dialogue, in other words, public reason, which leads to public reasoning, which means accommodation of a person, of a viewpoint which is contrary to yours. So the appointment of or selection of Ambedkar as the chairman of the drafting committee represented the scope for accommodation, which is nothing but another form of dialogue. And the manner in which Dr. B.R. Ambedkar functioned as the chairman of the drafting committee underlined an enduring tradition of dialogue. The framing of the Constitution of India through accommodation, understanding, and reconciliation represented a refreshing example of dialogue. And therefore, the Constitution of India till today survives and has emerged as a role model for the whole world. In our neighboring countries, constitutions have failed. Even in Nepal, where I think years have been spent to frame a constitution, there are still differences, irreconcilable differences. But in India, the constitution, which is a byproduct of dialogue, debate, discussion, accommodation, understanding, and reconciliation, without submerging the diversities, has emerged as role model. So therefore, we celebrate dialogue when we celebrate Constitution Day, which is day after tomorrow, 26th November. So the Constitution has many fundamental features, basic features, basic part of the basic structure: parliamentary democracy, secularism, fundamental rights, the federal principles, and so on and so forth. And if you examine closely, apply your mind closely to all these basic features or structures of the Indian Constitution, you will find at the core of them remains the dialogue. The deep dialogue between center and states, the dialogue between the citizens and the state, the dialogue between different regions of our country. So therefore, India represents a confluence of civilizations and cultures, not classes of cultures or civilizations. So this confluence of civilizations, which India represents, is nothing but a celebration of dialogue. So, these are the aspects which we need to keep in mind when you discuss, the significance of dialogue. It is of great significance at an individual level, at the societal level, at the family level, at the national level, and at the level of governance. There are several layers and layers of, domain in which dialogue is so critical for sustenance, for moving forward. We cannot move forward if there is uniformity. There is only one intent. There is only government intent or intent of any entity. There has to be intent, one intent, and there should be another intent to counter it. Chief Justice of India in his MC Chagla Memorial Lecture, he said there are different forms of truth. He said truth is an ally of democracy. Truth and democracy go together. I would recommend all of you to read Chief Justice of India's, MC Chagla Memorial Lecture. So he said now truth is emerging in different forms. See, earlier there was, we never heard of the truth associated with suppressed sections of society, truth associated with women, truth associated with Dalits, truth associated with many subaltern classes. Now we hear of gender equality. We hear of women's empowerment. And we hear of the statement that women's rights are human rights. There was a time when only, phrases and idioms associated with males were used. Now there are unisex, idioms, phrases. See, there was recently a decision taken that batsmen would no more be called as batsmen, they would be called batters, because now we have women's cricket team as well. So how can batsmen be employed to describe a batswoman? So they said instead of using batsmen, we should have batters. Somebody who is betting is called batters. And now you are hearing those terms in the newspapers when you open the sports pages. So, this change is taking place because there is a continuous dialogue going on in the frontiers of knowledge, as new consciousness evolves, that we should have a term, we should be gender neutral. Why it should be only male-centric? So how this continuous dialogue, debate, nobody has, picked up a sword or a knife to do this. It is through the class of ideas. It is through class based on dialogue that such changes are taking place in society. There was two genders, male and female. Now there is third gender, transgender. So how it has come about? It has come about through the clash of ideas, new thoughts, new forms of truth. So therefore, this can be understood better by employing dialogue and public reasoning, which are necessary, which are indispensable for deepening democracy. So therefore, these kind of new frontiers that you are witnessing today or you are engaged with, these new frontiers, they require a robust tradition of dialogue, a robust tradition of argumentation, a robust tradition of dissent. Okay, so therefore, the idea of freedom, the freedom of expression, etc., or idea of privacy of the individual, they are becoming extremely significant to promote the culture of dialogue or to sustain and deepen, expand the culture of dialogue. See, recently when the Pegasus spyware technology was employed, or it was found to be employed, in many countries, the Supreme Court took notice of it. And its judgment, the Supreme Court said, and I have written an article, you can Google my article, S.N. Sahu's articles in the leaflet.in. I have written about this Pegasus issue. He said, Supreme Court judgment stated that without the right to privacy and the right to expression, life would be meaningless. Nothing worthwhile could be done without these two basic rights. So it flagged two rights, right to privacy. I mean, if somebody is perpetually under surveillance, then, there would be a chilling effect. That's what the Supreme Court said. There would be a chilling effect on that individual to write something, to say something, or to express something. If somebody is under surveillance, then he would be all the time scared of thinking what to say, what not to say, what to write, and what not to write. So that would necessarily lead to self-censorship, because deep in the mind, there is a specter of surveillance. Somebody is watching, somebody is following, somebody is, snooping. So therefore, culture of dialogue would be completely diminished if such fears, become the guiding principles. So therefore, such surveillance by employing technology, spyware like Pegasus, that completely kills the tradition of dialogue, tradition of argument. Because what you write, what you say, what you photograph, what you put in your mobile, everything is being surveyed. And that's extremely dangerous, to these two rights which Supreme Court said are critical, for individual existence and right to life and so on and so forth. So dialogue, which is essential for right to life, because without properly thinking, without thinking, devoid of fear and anxiety, there can be no life at all. So therefore, these are the issues which need to be kept in mind. We should be mindful of such developments in the field of law, in the field of social sciences, in the field of technology. Okay, so, as students, when you pursue that, course on dialogue, you must understand the implications of such pronouncements made by the apex judiciary of our country. So that is the reason why, as I told you, now see, same Chief Justice who is part of the bench which gave this judgment, he said that, truth and democracy, they are the allies, they go together. And when you talk of truth cannot be arrived at by somebody's individual opinion. That opinion has to be combined with another opinion which is quite contrary to that. So only when there is a clash of diverse opinions, we will finally come to the truth. That means argumentation, that means dialogue, that means engagement, that means scrutiny and examination. So in this present day world, which is based on rapid and accelerated development of technology, now you are living in a surveillance society. You are constantly surveilled. There is a book called Surveillance Capitalism. It's written by a professor from Harvard. He says that in the surveillance capitalism, there is a threat to the freedom of expression, freedom of thought even. Because, the kind of surveillance that is being imposed or that is being carried out by employing the state agencies, that itself would make some people censor themselves, put limitations on themselves. That would be a threat to the right to expression, which remains at the heart of dialogue, heart of discussion. So therefore, these are the issues which need to be kept in mind while, remaining a student pursuing the, course and dialogue. And lastly, I would like to say, or maybe I'll take some more time. I hope there is enough time. What is the time span?
You can continue till 4:30. I think that's a good time because then we need to take question answers as well, and we need to you can finish it by 5 p.m.
Yeah, I hope all of you are enjoying this discussion. I hope. And
very
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I mean, if not enjoying, you have the patience to listen to me.
This is a dialogic, yeah. That's
Okay.
the essence of dialogue.
Okay, that's nice to know. So, so let me tell you that in the present day world order, which is often driven by these right-wing tendencies across the world, we are forgetting the fact that many of our spiritual traditions, they are based on dialogue. So for instance, in India, the Upanishads, it's based on dialogue. The holy scriptures of scripture of Hindus, Bhagavad Gita, it is based on dialogue between Lord Krishna and his disciple Arjuna in the battlefield. Similarly, in many other religious traditions, not just Hinduism, even in Islam, in Christianity. See, for instance, when Mahatma Gandhi, started his satyagraha, let me give you this example. See, when he started his satyagraha and established a ashram in Sabarmati, it's called Sabarmati Ashram, all of you know, to produce satyagrahis. So he said, who were the satyagrahis in history or mythology? To be cited as examples for Indians to become satyagrahis. And then Gandhi said there were 5 satyagrahis. He said first satyagrahi he took from Hindu mythology, and he was Bhakt Prahalad. He was a great devotee of a Hindu god called Hari, Vishnu or Hari. And see, he was tuned to recite the name of Hari, but his father dictated and threatened him to stop reciting the name of the god Hari, because his father was devotee of some other god. Okay, so his fanatic father tried to kill him, tried to drown him in water, tried to burn him in fire, because he refused to stop the recitation of the name of Lord Hari. So Gandhi said that Prahalad, while continuing to recite the name of Lord Hari, he never prayed Hari to kill his father, so that he would have peace of mind and continued his worship of Hari. So he said, so Prahalad, while continuing to recite the name of Lord Hari, he never any ill will against his father who was out to kill him. So Gandhi said, like Prahalad, we have to fight against British rule without any ill will against the oppressors. The second Satyagrahi, Gandhi said, is Socrates from Greek philosophy. Socrates was poisoned. He was asked to drink poison, but he had no ill will against the king who offered him poison. Third Satyagrahi, according to Gandhi, was Jesus Christ. And all of you know that example. And fourth Satyagrahi, according to Gandhi, was from Islam, Imam Hussain. Imam Hussein's example gave Gandhi immense strength to fine-tune his idea of Satyagraha. Because Imam Hussain attained martyrdom. He sacrificed his own life and he never took anybody's life. So Gandhi drew lessons of Satyagraha from Islam as well. And the fifth Satyagrahi, according to Gandhi, was a woman Satyagrahi, and she was Mirabai from Hinduism. And Mirabai was persecuted by her own husband-in-laws because she was a princess, a Rajput princess. She mingled with ordinary people, and her guru was a Dalit. She was thrown out of the palace. So this dialogue of Gandhi with Christianity, with Islam, with Hinduism, and Greek history gave him the lessons of Satyagraha. So how even the method or the technique of freedom movement based on Satyagraha, that was derived from Gandhi's, engagements with different streams of faith. It was not just from one religion, from different religions. So this confluential approach is necessary for dialogue. It has always been there throughout history. We need to adopt this confluential approach, which will counter sectarianism and bigotry, which is often emerging to stifle mind. Alvin Toffler, in his book Third Wave, I think that book, I can later on give you the exact name of the publication. He said that unless these medieval tendencies emerging in different parts of the world threatening secularism is contained, humanity will inevitably leap into the medieval era of darkness. These are the words of Alvin Toffler. So therefore, he said, we need to fight these medieval tendencies, which are emerging in the form of different fundamentalisms, to impose a narrative based on fanaticism, based on sectarianism, based on hatred, and so on and so forth. This culture of hatred, which we often counter in many parts of the world in 21st century, that is the enemy of dialogue. That is counter to the tradition of dialogue. So therefore, the Gandhi's approach, as I told you, to derive lessons of Satyagraha from different religions meant that he actually remained engaged in the different, engaged in understanding different religious streams to produce or to fine-tune the idea of Satyagraha, which is so relevant today. I mean, the farmers' movement, which I referred to earlier, represented the shining example of Satyagraha in 21st century and how non-violent, peaceful it was. And that led to public reasoning and dialogue, which eventually, compelled the government to withdraw the farm bills. And in the farmers' movement, as I told you, as Gandhi was engaged with different streams of religion to fine-tune the idea of Satyagraha as a method of dialogue, because Satyagraha is a method of dialogue. Satyagraha is based on love, not an enmity or hatred. And when there is element of love, scope of love, this means there is scope for discussion, there is scope for understanding, scope for accommodation. And this means it is opening the way for dialogue. So the farmers' movement, when it consisted of 6 jats Muslims, and people from different regions of the world, it represented the living dialogue which India represents. So therefore, as I told you, the recitation of Allahu Akbar, Har Har Mahadev, and Vahe Guru, and all that, it's a remarkable tradition of dialogue which was manifested in a movement. And therefore, it was impossible for the mighty state of India to suppress it, oppress it, or even they used all kinds of names, to defame it, but eventually it succeeded. And it is continuing. So therefore, such lessons which derive from the movement are the vital lessons to enrich the traditions of dialogue. As I told you, it is there in every religion. It is there in the ancient traditions of learning. It is there in Buddhist philosophy as well. Professor Amartya Sen, he was saying that, he was referring to the dialogue in Bhagavad Gita, between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. See, for instance, in Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna, the great warrior, he refused to fight because he saw in the battlefield his own, his own kith and kin, and he was saying that he was, he was quite, he was gripped by despondency, by the sheer understanding that he would get the throne only after killing them. But he was unwilling to do so. But he was explained by Lord Krishna that such despondency was not, was not certainly worthy of a warrior who was supposed to perform his duty. So Lord Krishna asked him to perform his duties regardless of, who was there in the battlefield, whether they are his kith and kin or somebody else. So, so Amartya Sen says, what Lord Krishna said had some truth, and what Arjuna said had some truth. So from these true traditions of truth, we have to, derive lessons. In other words, one has to derive lessons from different traditions of learning. So therefore, this dialogue eventually takes one to a higher level of learning or to higher levels of truth. So that is why, even our own ancient traditions, be it of Islam or Hinduism or Christianity or Buddhism, they are so critical in understanding the contemporary issues of our society. See, for instance, when Dr. B.R. Ambedkar piloted a Hindu Code Bill, which had the mandate to guarantee the rights of women to property and also guarantee other rights, they were opposed by, some Hindus in the Constituent Assembly Legislative when it was piloted. So Mr. Ambedkar, who was a firm critique of Hindu scriptures, he burnt Hindu scripture called Manusmriti because it was perpetuating untouchability, it was perpetuating caste system, it was perpetuating patriarchy. Okay, so he challenged Manusmriti and burnt it. But when he was defending Hindu Code Bill and explained in the Constituent Assembly Legislative that Hindu Code Bill would guarantee the rights to women to own property, he was quoting from Manusmriti because Manusmriti guaranteed some right to women to own property. So look at Ambedkar, he was rejecting Manusmriti, he was burning it, but at the same time, he was deriving that lesson from Manusmriti to defend the rights of women to own property. So rejection of one scripture doesn't mean that rejection of other aspects of that scripture which are of contemporary relevance. Similarly, while rejecting Smritis or the ancient scriptures of India, he was invoking Smritis in defense of the rights of women. And then he asked the Constituent Assembly legislature, this Hindu Code bill said was not based on modern law and jurisprudence. I mean, it was as much based on modern law and jurisprudence as much on traditional insights on women's rights. So he was combining both modern and traditional, to advance a cause by giving adequate reasoning. He said in his Annihilation of Caste, that great book which is now being read and widely reviewed and commented upon. He said what India required is a religion based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. Okay, and all of you know that the word fraternity, which is there in the preamble of the Constitution, was added at the instance of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Okay, so he said a religion based on liberty, equality, and fraternity would require sustenance. And then he said for the sustenance of such a religion, Indians need not look for sources which is beyond India, beyond the frontiers of India. He said the sustenance of a religion based on liberty, equality, and fraternity would come from Upanishads, which he criticized somewhere else. Okay, so this is a tradition of dialogue, a dialogue between modernity and tradition, and the modern ideas based on law and jurisprudence, was supported by ideas enshrined in the sacred Upanishads. So this is where, even we find that how we can use the traditional knowledge, the ancient knowledge, to support a modern idea. So therefore this continuity, this is a kind of a dialogue which is continuing right from ancient times. So this continuity of dialogue, based on modern ideas, and then juxtaposed with traditional wisdom or ancient wisdom, that should be the approach, to accommodate every stream of thought, whether they originated in ancient times or in modern times. So, see, for instance, when, capitalism emerged in Europe, even thinkers like Max Weber, they refer to Protestant ethics to explain the emergence of capitalism, because Protestant ethics actually taught how to save, how to spend less money, and how to get up early and work hard. So that kind of approach was followed by a great thinker like Max Weber to give a reasoning behind the emergence of capitalism, which is quite remarkable. So every intellectual tradition has derived sustenance and inspiration from the traditional sources to explain the modern phenomenon. Now, for instance, in the context of climate change, you see, in the context of the rise in global temperature, see, so far global temperature risen to 1.1 degrees Celsius in relation to the temperature of the world which was there in pre-industrial period. So now the pre-industrial period temperature has become a model reference, a reference point, so as to contain the rise of Earth's temperature, which is now at 1.1 degrees Celsius. And the Conference of Parties in Glasgow, they emphasized, which was concluded very recently, it emphasized that the temperature should be limited to 1.5 degree Celsius by 2045. And that requires reduction of emission, by 2035 or 30 or so. And that level should be, reduction level should be in reference to 2010 emission level. Now you see, pre-industrial time, that is feudal period. So feudal period climate and temperature is now becoming relevant for the 21st century world order, which is confronting climate change and rise in global temperature. Now, it is in this context, this is a remarkable phase of in history of humanity where people are going back to the pre-industrial period to say that human activity in pre-industrial period was not to that extent vigorous to use the resources and energy of the planet to that extent which we are using now. So therefore, temperature was, that time was not causing global warming, and now in the industrial civilization we have caused global warming. Okay, so we are looking back to the pre-industrial period. So this dialogue between pre-industrial period and the present day period, which is characterized as the age of Anthropocene, where human activity has been augmented like anything, and therefore we have completely carbonized our economy. It's a carbon economy. The carbon economy has to be decarbonized. And for decarbonization of economy, you are looking back to the pre-industrial period climate and temperature. So, so this is a kind of a dialogue which is being carried forward by relying on diverse sources. The present day modern scientific understanding behind climate change and the pre-industrial climate and temperature. And therefore, now, for instance, people are saying, now they prescribe that we should use less private cars, more public transport. We should go for cycling and walking and so on and so forth. Now, there was a time when, even now, possession of a car is a prestigious thing. But now possession of a car is considered from the point of view of the, global warming and climate change. So this understanding, this kind of dialogue, which is now, opening a new frontier to understand the lifestyle in the context of reducing the carbon footprint, is quite fascinating. So, we are engaged at different levels to have a new consciousness. And that's all coming because of our understanding, because of our dialogue, because of our persuasion of ideas. So this class of ideas in the present era of climate change and global warming is also relevant. And how this dialogue is now leading us to understand or observe an earth hour. We are now feeling, we have this consciousness centering around the entire earth. It's not just individual or national. It's not just global, or for that matter. So therefore, this has happened, without anybody firing a shot or firing a gun. This happened at the realm of ideas. And this realm of ideas is now churning because of dialogue between different forms of knowledge. So therefore, again, let me refer to, Mahatma Gandhi, who said in 1927 that even 1915 he said that the planet has been exploited by so many greedy people, and to such an extent the exploitation has gone for so long that we want to exploit like them, then we need to search for another planet, because this planet has been overexploited. Now the same thing is being talked about today, that in the present, if we lead the present lifestyle, we require so much resource and energy. We would require so much resource and energy, and future generation would not find one planet Earth as sufficient. We require several planets. So Gandhi said that in 1915, and now we are confronting the same situation. And the United Nations report says that at the present rate of the consumption of energy and resources of the planet, we may require 6 planets. So where are the 6 planets available? Okay, so these are the thoughts which have come, by look at Gandhi's, prescient, thinking, which was manifested in his prediction that mankind may require more than one planet. I mean, that was the inference one gets from his writings. Similarly, he was asked a question by an American in 1938, February 1938. One American came to him and told him that the president of America of that period, 1938, I think it was Roosevelt who was there, he said that he had a vision for American society, that every American family would possess 2 cars and 2 radio sets. That was the vision of American president. He wanted to see every American family to have 2 radio sets and 2 cars. And then that man asked Gandhi, what was your vision? What was his vision of Indian society? So Gandhi said he would not survive the day to see every Indian family possessing 1 radio set. But he said, if every Indian family would possess 1 car, there would be so many cars on the road and people would not find enough space to walk. And that situation is prevailing now. In Delhi, we do not find enough space even to walk. In many markets, many places. And Gandhi said, in my vision of Indian society, possession of a car would not be considered a meritorious thing. Now, whole, COP 26 or 25 or whatever, is they are saying there are too many cars which is causing global warming and carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. And therefore, global warming is taking place in an accelerated pace. Climate is changing. So now possession of a car is not found to be meritorious, is not held to be meritorious. So therefore, the question, the interrogation that is taking place, the dialogue in the context of climate change is very, very interesting. They are now saying that by respecting the culture and customs of the tribals, we will save the planet Earth. So in other words, the tribals or the indigenous people, their lifestyle never threatened the planet. The lifestyle of we living in cities is posing a danger to the planet. Now so therefore, here again, one has to remain sensitive to the dialogic traditions so that we derive lessons from the lives of the tribal people or the societies of the tribals. And therefore, indigenous people, they gather in the climate change conferences saying that their culture, their tradition need to be protected. So what is required, is a kind of a, rainbow approach. We should have a different colors, not just one color. And I will end by referring to a beautiful story, once narrated by a scholar from, I think, a Scandinavian country, Norway. His name is Johan Galton. So Johan Galton, in his book, Human Rights in Another Key, he narrates this story. The story is like this. First came the, these people, some, what they call blue color. Blue color, they said that, what is required is that there should be complete freedom to do whatever one likes in the field of business. So laissez-faire, he called that laissez-faire. The state should not interfere in business matters. People should pursue, their choice of business to multiply the wealth. And so therefore, capitalism grew and wealth was generated. Possessive individualism was celebrated. And then that caused a lot of problems, inequality, exploitation. And then they came red. Red means the communists. So they said, no, there must be some control. So after the blue, they came the red, and they established some control. And they also said, we require science, we require production, but there must be some kind of a equality distribution and so on and so forth. Then both blue and red, they caused so much of human activity and therefore there was pollution of river, there was pollution of air, there was environmental degradation. Then came the Greens, and they talked about environmental consciousness. Okay, then all these people, they went to the indigenous forests, and they explained to them the value of river, value of forest, value of preserving lives. So those indigenous people said, these are part of our way of life. You are talking to us about the keeping our rivers clean. We never polluted them. The pollution has come from you, the blue and red people. We have always kept our rivers clean. We have kept our forests. We preserved our forests. So then, what new things you are talking about? So then, then Johan Galton says, we not only require blue, red, and green, we require rainbow of rights. We require all colors. This rainbow of rights, that broad spectrum rainbow of rights is critical for sustaining the culture of dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sahu. And anybody who has any questions now may ask them. Rajya?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I don't have a question, but I just had a comment related to what Professor said about the whistle, the whistle of a cooker. So the dialogue or they act like a safety valve for the democracy. So I just wanted to share an example that I picked up while during my travels to Portugal. So in Portugal, around 2018 or 2017, they had these, I don't know if it's still there because governments keep changing, but they had allocated a huge amount of public spaces and walls for graffiti, where where if you're angry with the government, you can just come and make a graffiti. And there were like the entire city was there were these specific areas which were full of them, and some of them were really angry ones, and they're very creative ones, very beautifully, very well made. But at the end of the day, it was just a way when what the citizens told me is just a way that people would just express their angers, and it was sort of and their angers would sort of reside. So that's another way of dialogue which the government has sort of come up. We've seen this a lot even in Kashmir, where people do it. Of course, it is not mandated by the government. Government doesn't want it to happen, but I think this is another way where another creative way where another government has sort of used. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that whistle part, and I just identified. So wanted to bring that. Thanks.
Oh, this is a wonderful example. I didn't know, so I'm really educated. Wonderful point you made. When this Truth and Reconciliation Commission established by Nelson Mandela after South Africa attained freedom, that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it was stated that anybody can come, be they blacks or whites, they can say whatever they did to either community, whatever violence, whatever killing, murder, and nobody would be persecuted for what they say. Okay, so that provided a channel to vent out what they did, what wrongs they did, what rights they and what kind of good action they could engaged in. So as a result, that enabled a lot of anger to come out, lot of frustrations, lot of repentance could be let out through that Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So these are the mechanisms which have been established by such great statesmen like Nelson Mandela. They say that we cannot take revenge, we cannot resort to retribution, we cannot be vindictive. We need to speak out and let out all those which were we thought were wrong or right or whatever. So that actually softened a lot of hard edges of society. So it is important, that point you said, people got the walls to draw the graffitis, and therefore it was a kind of a catharsis, It was wonderful. Thanks a lot for educating.
So I'm so sorry. Your talk has been so thought-provoking. We have so many more questions lined up, so many more observations. Pushpika, you may go next.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And hello, sir. Thank you so much, first of all, for this very, very interesting topic. Being a student of JNU, I could relate to the very core of it, and I was really able to, understand the essence, because JNU is one such place where the heart lies in the spirit of dialogue. This is what I've really learned there. So I have a question. That is that, being a student of JNU, we used to come across the questions like, ki why people are, why students are so loud there. Because generally, what I can see, or what we all know, is that people, where this is a place where, dialogue, or raising your voice, showing your dissent is like, is not a thing of students. We are just supposed to, read and pass the exams. So, what would be the informal way, or as an individual, what would be our response to really, um, uh, tackle with such kind of people and really educate them regarding the importance of having a dialogue? So what should be that informal way, that how we could, really make educate or aware people in the sense, especially our students of, our age, who doesn't still know, or who are unaware of the importance of having a dialogue or having a dissent. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's good to know. Even I am from JNU. Yeah,
Wow.
I studied, way back in 1979-81.
Oh my god.
So that, I think that was the golden period of JNU.
Yes,
So,
sir.
so I have seen, you know, students of SFI engaged in, fierce, debates with other groups. There was a group called Free Thinkers.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that body doesn't exist anymore in JNU.
No,
So
sir.
there was a, I'm just giving this example. There was a, student who came from Kanpur IIT after doing BTech. He did his BTech in Kanpur IIT and joined JNU to do MA History in ancient India. Okay, he wanted to study ancient India. His name is David Thomas.
Okay.
Okay, so David Thomas, he was the leader. He became the leader after his wonderful oratory. And I have heard his speeches. He was very sharply attacked by SFI students, but he replied each and every point and he completely demolished them. So, and after that, they used to sit over a cup of tea, both of them. So I was
That's
wondering, I recently met David Thomas in Kodaikanal. He settled there. So I told him as a young student, when I entered JNU, I saw you getting very fiercely attacked by students in a debate, and you responded with much more sharper ideas. And they found themselves cornered. But after that, both of you were sitting and having tea. So this is a power of dialogue. So, what you said, how to take up the issue. So, the issue is that I believe, to my mind, if you look at our freedom struggle, I have been a student of Gandhi's writings, and I find amazing insights from our freedom struggle. See how Gandhi used to meet Jinnah, even though Jinnah would never came to meet Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi met Jinnah 17 times to avoid partition of India, but Jinnah never came to meet Gandhi. Or for that matter, how Gandhi and Subhas Bose had remarkable respect for each other, even though they differed. But then it was Subhas Bose who called Gandhi the father of the nation. Okay, and Gandhi called Subhas Bose the prince among patriots, while differing with him as far as his methods are concerned. But he said he's a prince among patriots. He could bring together Hindus, Muslims, Christians to shed blood. Okay, and so these are the examples from our own freedom struggle, which give a lot of strength to the culture of dialogue. For instance, in pre-independent India, and it continued till 1950s, in railway stations, there used to be Hindu tea and Muslim tea. Tea was sold, vendors used to shout Hindu tea, Muslim tea, Hindu water, Muslim water in railway stations.
Oh my God.
Yeah, this continued till 1950s. So Mahatma Gandhi referred to that, example of vendors selling Hindu tea and Muslim tea, in railway stations. Again, he referred to in 1947. Okay, so he went to jail to see the soldiers of INA, Indian National Army of Subhas Bose, who were jailed in the prison. So when he met the soldiers told Gandhi that how unfortunate it was that they were served Hindu tea and Muslim tea inside the jail. And they said, we fought not as Hindus and Muslims, but as Indians. Now inside jail, they were held as prisoners and they were served Hindu tea and Muslim tea, and they found it very offending. So then Gandhi said, so how do you deal with that situation when you get Hindu tea and Muslim tea? So one soldier said, we get Hindu tea and Muslim tea and mix it, and then we have it. So Gandhi had a hearty laugh. He said, this is how the approach, this is dialogue. So you combine both the opposing viewpoints and then, confront life or face life. So he said, this is called heart unity, So Gandhi gave such, I wrote an article, I think last year or year before, when somebody ordered food, through Zomato in Madhya Pradesh. And then, the delivery boy sent a message saying, he was a Muslim. So that fellow who ordered food, he refused to accept. He said, this is the month of Shravan. This is the month when Lord Shiva is worshipped. And how can he accept food being delivered by a Muslim? So then, there was an uproar in the Twitter. And Zomato said food has no religion. So Zomato canceled the order. And Zomato was highly appreciated, in the social media. I wrote an article, this Zomato food being refused by a Hindu because a Muslim boy, a delivery boy was supplying that. Makes us recall Hindu tea and Muslim tea of the pre-independent period. So, these are the examples from freedom struggle, So such examples, if we can put there, because freedom struggle is a remarkable, struggle based on dialogue, engagement, understanding the other's perspective, but at the same time, keeping one's own stand very, very clear and completely respecting everybody else while remaining stuck to one's own stand. So I think that is a important aspect from freedom struggle, which needs to be flagged all the time. So I hope
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, sir. So what I'm drawing right now from your words is that that mixing of both teas refers to finding commonality between the person and me, and then creating the dialogue.
Yeah,
I think that is there.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you, Pragya, for that amazing and very interesting information she gave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pushpika. Now, Ravi Dubey, you can ask your question.
You, ma'am. Sir, as we talked about the democracy, So with the democracy, there comes the globalization era and then the hyper globalization era. But there is also a book by Samuel P. Huntington about the clash of civilization. So is the clash of civilization is going to be a true part in this hyper globalized era with the democracy? I mean, in which way we are going to see this in coming days? Because the examples are there are many examples for this, that there is going to be a clash of civilization, or it is somewhere taking that Rwanda genocide, if you take it, the Hutsis, or a little bit case of the Afghanistan. So how we all are going to, it has always been that democracy has always revived itself.
No. Actually, this class of civilization theory advocated by Huntington, Samuel Huntington, is nothing new. It was also advocated by Britishers. There is the book by Mahatma Gandhi, Satyagraha in South Africa. In that book, Gandhi refers to a letter written to him by General Smuts, who was ruling South Africa. He was the ruler of South Africa. He jailed Gandhi. He had a great respect for Gandhi. So General Smuts, in fact, in that letter, referred to class of civilizations. He said, Mr. Gandhi, you belong to Oriental civilization. And the Britishers, they belong to Western civilization. Okay. Then Smuts said, whether anybody liked or did not like, the fact was that people of Western civilization shed blood, in pursuit of their goals, in multiplying their wants and desires. He said people of Western civilization had shed blood for the objectives, for securing their objectives. Okay. Whereas, the objective was to possess more and more, possess more territories, possess more wealth, possess, whatever, they wanted to possess. And they did it, and therefore they had shed blood. Then he told Gandhi that you people from Eastern civilization, you believe in contentment, moderation. We do not believe that. We did not believe. That's what General Smuts. He said these two cultures from Eastern civilization, Western civilization, they could not coexist, because if they come together, they would necessarily clash. So therefore, because they would necessarily clash, these two cultures or civilizations, if they would come together or coexist, there would be clash of cultures or civilizations. Therefore, there should be one set of rights for them, a different set of rights for whites. One set of rights for Britishers, one set of rights for Indians. So General Smuts was giving the idea of class of civilizations to justify differential system of rights. One set of rights for whites in South Africa, another set of rights for Indians, or maybe a different set for the blacks. Okay, so this class of civilization has always been anchored in a differential set of rights. Okay, but that is the perspective which has come from the Western mind. But Gandhi said, we believe in confluence of cultures. When Huntington gave the theory of class of civilizations, I remember President K.R. Narayanan, he was the president of India. I was working as his press secretary in Rashtrapati Bhavan. So he said, cultures or civilizations never clash. It is barbarians who clash. Civilizations come together to form confluences, to form confluence of ideas. Okay, so we need to emphasize on confluence of civilizations, because this world has evolved to this level not through classes but through confluences, exchange of thoughts, exchange of ideas. So there is an interesting book by Ranjit Hoskote and another German scholar, Confluences. No civilization can take credit that it has developed or evolved by its indigenous sources. Every civilization has taken something or other from different other civilizations, and therefore they have come to this level. So the confluence of civilizations remains at the root of the evolution of humanity. It's not the class of civilizations. There are classes, no doubt, wars have taken place, nobody is dismissing that. But eventually, what has prevailed is what has remained enduring feature of the civilizational ethos of humanity is obviously confluences and commonalities, which have united us together.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sahu. Mr. Arokya George, you can share your observation or ask your question now.
Sir, there has been many public reasoning manifestations and protests in the past. A few were successful and we celebrate them. And most of the times, these public reasoning manifestations are won or overcome by the government's will. Most of the times, I mean, the government will takes up and sometimes deviates the whole manifestation by violence or distraction. And still we continue to have many public reasoning manifestations. And why don't we learn from our past? For example, you have mentioned almost 750 lives were lost in the protest. Why don't we learn from the public reasoning to have a dialogue, to have a possibility of sitting together before implementing any bills?
Yeah.
What are the impediments? What are the blocks?
No, actually, the impediments can be traced to many factors. And one of the key factors is the, let's say, arrogance of the political regimes or arrogance of the leaders. They feel that, they have the majority strength or the mandate they have, they can do anything. So this, obduracy, this, impervious attitude, which flows from the manner in which they gathered, they got the huge majority or mandate of the people, that is coming on the way. Okay, see, for instance, now the parliamentary committees are being completely made dysfunctional by the political regimes, in India. See, last time when the Pegasus issue was being taken up in a parliamentary committee headed by Mr. Shashi Tharoor, the officials, they never came. This is unheard of, in the history of Indian Parliament. So when the officials, they do not present themselves before a parliamentary committee, that means it's a contempt of Parliament. So, and they are emboldened to do so because the regime, they do not care for the Parliament. Because they have the majority. So one of the main reasons why they do not engage in dialogue or debate or discussion is because of this arrogance. And this arrogance is, for last 7 years that I have found, is quite disturbing. And I never, because I worked in Parliament, I worked in Rashtrapati Bhavan, I worked in Prime Minister's office, and I have never seen any other reason, even including in the regime of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He was so responsive to the parliamentary institutions. So therefore, this is a kind of a very, very disturbing trend, which is extremely dangerous for the Republic of India. But at the same time, I have hope. I have hope that this is a passing phase of our republic, and I'm sure as President K.R. Narayanan once said, these disturbances in the parliament, they are like the middles of the Middle Ages. So this will pass. Okay, so I am sure with the farmers movement and many other disaffections which are gathering momentum in many parts of the country, that would put a check on the political regime which is now managing the state apparatus of our country. This is
Thank
what
you,
I
sir.
feel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sahu. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you, sir. My name is Rajan. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us on this wonderful topic. Sir, my top question is that, when we talk about the concept of dialogue itself, so how do you look at the flavor of ideology in particular dialogue? Because when two parties sit together, and if both are different ideology, I do not think that there is any possibility of agreement, because both ideology stick to their particular ideology. So when we often say that philosophy is a synonymous of dialogue, so philosophy does not embrace ideology at all. So how do you look at this ideology flavor when it enters into the idea of dialogue? And sir, within this question, I want to know, like, for dialogue we need to have tark, but when we include the atark or kutark, how can basically dialogue may proceed? This was of course the reason that Manu said that Ved Nindako Astika, because people were basically providing so many kutark. That's why he said that those who criticizes Vedas or Upanishads are basically Nastik. So how do you look at this phenomenon? And sir, one criticism I want to proceed, that when we were talking about the Zomato incident, when religion comes by an institution, when religion become institutional, we have to think that every religion has certain fundamentals. No religion is ready to sacrifice their fundamental. It was the selfishness of Zomato that he basically looted that opportunity and get appreciation from the country. What about other religion who are stick to their fundamental? Take for instance, if I would like to go to the Hajj Yatra, would I be given the opportunity to visit? I have to follow certain rule and regulation. Then I would be capable to visit the Hajj Yatra. Otherwise, I would not be given the opportunity. That person who negated that I would not take that delivery, he had certain fundamentals which has been provided him through certain institution. So how do you look at this institutional aspect of the religion which no one wants to sacrifice? These things that I wanted to say.
Okay. Now, for taking your first question, about different ideologies which are incompatible with each other and how dialogue would proceed when ideological purity is, upheld or stuck to. Well, actually, there should be different ideologies. There should be there should be, it's not an ideal thing, or it's not a desirable thing to have ideologies which are compatible, which are, agreeable to one another. See, in India, there are different ideologies. Whether you like it or not, or somebody likes it or not, or accepts it or not, there are certainly diverse ideologies. Famous historian E.P. Thompson, he said, there is every thought is playing in the minds of every Indian. There are Maoists, there are Marxists, there are right wingers, there are middle path followers. There are Gandhians, there are socialists. So he describes India as a cauldron of ideologies or ideas. Okay, so is the case with every other country. My point is, the ideologies which are compatible with the Constitution of India must coexist. Suppose an ideology which believes in violence and bloodshed and exclusion of others, that ideology needs to be countered, and that ideology has to be revised. Okay, see, for instance, there was a time when even the Jansangh and Hindu Mahasabha, they talked of establishing a Hindu Rashtra. Even the present day rulers in India, those who are controlling the state apparatus, some of them, they talk about Hindu Rashtra. Well, they let them talk, but then I mean, they have to, the governance has to be carried on, based on the constitutional principles and values, the constitutional morality. So you have to deal with the constitution, and there is no scope in the constitution at all, which would allow you one to establish any rashtra based on any religion. Okay, so therefore ideologies have to coexist, and they must be compatible with the constitution, which is the fundamental law of the land, and also they have to be compatible with the civilizational ethos of this country, which is diverse in nature. So see, for instance, communist ideology. Communist ideology, Mahatma Gandhi said that I do accept it, the communist ideology, minus its violence. And then he said, I am a philosophical communist. Gandhi himself described. There was also, I mean, if you look at closely the constitutional provisions, constitution itself doesn't subscribe to any ideology. Be it communism or be it socialism or be it any kind of right-wing philosophy or ism based on right-wing ideas. So our constitution has been framed in such a manner that the politics that would play up based on the constitution within the constitutional framework would eventually help them to realize the goals enshrined in the constitution. So even see CPIM members, Ambedkar said in the Constitutional Assembly, they want dictatorship of the proletariat. They want to throw the state. So this is the problem with the communists. But then now look at the communists, the way in which they've evolved. They don't talk about dictatorship. They don't talk of throwing out the state. They talk of dealing with the constitution. Okay, so they see, for instance, somebody said, no, India has to be a Hindu Rashtra. He said, then you have to deal with the constitution. We the people of India, where they have enshrined secularism in the constitution. So therefore, ideological differences, no problem at all. Or different existence of different ideologies, there is no problem as long as they are within the framework of the constitution. So that constitutional morality which Ambedkar emphasized and flagged, that constitutional morality should be the guiding principle. And based on that, obviously there is scope for dialogue. See, in Bihar last elections, it is the CPI-ML which got 12 seats in the Bihar Assembly. And how did they get 12 seats? Because they remained engaged in dialogue with the people. Okay, so similarly, these forces which have come now with a huge mandate after 2014, whatever they may talk, they have to deal with the constitution. Okay, so therefore, even that ideology is compatible provided the constitutional principles are followed. So any breach of the constitutional principles would invite, judicial scrutiny. Okay, so therefore, I do not find any problem if there are different ideologies, provided those ideologies are operated within the framework of the constitution. And of late, what we are seeing is that there is an attack on the constitution, no doubt. But at the same time, the recent pronouncements of the Chief Justice or recent orders of the Supreme Court eventually generates hope that the constitutional structure would be kept sacrosanct, or within that framework, the ideological play would obviously be there. And other question I am forgetting, there are two, three questions you asked.
Sir, I was asking, all of us subscribe to one thing, that when that Zomato incident happened, that
okay, yeah, the religious fundamentalism. I mean, the fundamental religion. See, the fundamentals of religion, that the person who booked food through Zomato, the fundamental religion that he suppose talks that I won't accept food being delivered by a Muslim boy, that's primarily flawed. So that he has to be engaged in dialogue to understand that, if he is talking of, Shiva, divinity associated with Shiva, that divinity, has nothing to do with, person in terms of the faith. See, for instance, in Gita, Swami Vivekananda, he explained Gita. He said, what was the essence of Gita? And I really, was quite educated to read Swami Vivekananda's interpretation of Gita. He said, in Gita, it is, Lord Krishna, for the first time, he made everybody equal at the spiritual plane. He said, whether you do karma, dhyan or jnana or bhakti or whatever, you'd reach the same goal. He said, before advent of Lord Krishna, there were sects established in India based on karma, based on dhyan, jnana, bhakti and all that. And those sects used to fight. Fierce bloodshed used to take place. So those sectarian fights created a horrible condition in India. And Swami Vivekananda, referring to those sectarian fights based on karma, jnana, bhakti and dhyan, he said, Lord Krishna emerged at that point of time when he said, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. He was talking about the decline of dharma because of the sectarian fights and bloodshed. Then he said, everybody is equal, whether somebody is pursuing the line of bhakti or line of karma or jnana, he would reach the same goal. Swami Vivekananda, in his Chicago speech, he said, howsoever crooked the path may be, one would reach that same divinity. So then, therefore, the Zomato fellow is rejecting food from a Muslim boy. He should be explained, this is Gita. In Gita, it is said that whatever you do, you will reach that same goal, provided you do it with all dedication and devotion. So, this kind of interpretation, very liberal, modern, and this has been interpreted by such a great monk like Swami Vivekananda. So therefore, what he was doing was in complete negation of fundamentals of Gita. Okay, so this is how you need to interpret. See, I went to Divine Life Society in Rishikesh and I stayed there. And it is open to everybody, be they Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and anybody. On the day of Gandhi Jayanti, I was there in Rishikesh, and they said, we celebrate Gandhi Jayanti. I said, why do you celebrate Gandhi Jayanti? So they gave a beautiful explanation. He said, Gandhi started, freedom struggle based on Satya, Ahimsa, Aparigraha, Satya, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Atreya. Satya means truth. Ahimsa means, non-violence. Brahmacharya means, your achar should be such that you will attain Brahma. Your conduct should be such that you will attain divinity. Brahmacharya, understood in a limited sense of observing celibacy, that's a very partial understanding of Brahmacharya. Okay, and then Aparigraha means non-possession. Asteya means non-stealing. You don't steal anybody's, property, resources, and so on and so forth. Now, these principles, I learned it from a monk in Rishikesh, Swami Niliptanand. He said, these principles are the principles of sannyasa or renunciation. Those who become monk, they follow those principles. Gandhi implemented those principles in the larger context of politics, society, economy, and freedom struggle. Okay, so therefore, Swami Sivananda, who established Divine Life Society, he sent a emissary to Gandhi saying that they stood by Gandhi because he is applying some principles of sannyas in the larger context of society, polity, economy, and freedom of India to give freedom struggle a moral momentum. This Satya, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Asteya, they are Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Then he added other values, other ideals, Swadeshi, Sarva Dharma Sambhava, Sarvatra Bhayavarjana, Sarirasrama, physical labor. Aswad means control of palate. Okay, and then, Sparsha Bhavana, this means abolition of untouchability. These are the things we added to those 5 principles of Patanjali, and he produced Ekadas Brat, 11 vows. Those 11 vows he employed and mobilized a huge mass movement, and therefore it gave a moral dimension to freedom struggle. Okay, now these are the real fundamentals of yoga religion, of Hinduism. Now those fundamentals has nothing to do with these rituals, whether you go to a temple or not, whether to worship a god or goddess or not. These are the foundational principles. Mahabharata has a quotation, Sanskrit, which says, what is dharma? Dharma means, to renounce, to embrace truth, to be non-violent, to be, non-possessive. So these are the great ideals. Achha, those ideals nobody discusses. On International Yoga Day, people discuss about only asana. But asana is 3rd stage. Yama, niyama, asana, then pranayam, then pratyahar, then dharana, then dhyan, then samadhi. These are the aspects. Nobody talks, only one is fixated with asanas. So therefore, these are the fundamentals which need to be explained. See, when people talk of Islam, now unfortunately Islam is associated with, many people associate jihad, violence, terrorism. But there is a stream of Islam, which represented by Imam Hussein, which is remarkable. Therefore Gandhi derived the lessons of Satyagraha from Imam Hussein. Now nobody talks about that. So these are the dimensions, these are the fundamentals, I believe, of religion, which we need to take forward and discuss in public forums, in any forum that is available to us. So therefore that fellow, he says, no, this is the fundamental of Hinduism. I will not accept food from a Muslim. I think he's completely mistaken, horribly mistaken.
Yes, sir, but that Zomato company should also be criticized because he took the benefit of his ignorance. That person was ignorant.
No. Zomato didn't refer to any religion. He said food has no religion.
Of course, but
so why should my
also
point
apply
is,
to the place as
Zomato,
well.
Point is, Zomato never said that, he is taking a decision as per Hinduism or Islam or Christianity. He's saying we are supplying food, has nothing to do with religion. Now, people, if you associate a particular food with religion, that's your problem.
Thank you, Mr. Sahu, for sharing so much with us. All your experiences through the years from JNU up till now, and you are a very prolific writer as well, and orator as well. And you also shared your huge reading experience with us. It feels like one is talking to a library. Each time I've interacted with you, you've had so much to share, so many insightful ideas and concepts. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you all the students for your questions as well. With this, we come to the end of the session today, and we will meet you next week.
Thank you so much for your kind words. It was wonderful interacting with young students. So, it's all based on my, whatever experience you call it, the life is on, life is moving. So whatever little, I got from, from books and from my associate with President K.R. Narayanan, I because of him, I read the original writings of Gandhi, Ambedkar, Nehru and all that. So wonderful interacting with you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.